The phone rang at 2:47 in the morning. Stephen stared at the unknown number, his thumb hovering over the decline button. Rain hammered against the window of his one-bedroom apartment. His 6-year-old daughter slept in the next room, clutching a worn teddy bear. The phone kept ringing. He answered. A woman's voice came through, trembling and barely above a whisper. "Stephen, it's Denise. Denise from Lincoln High. Can you come get me?" He locked the door. "I'm outside and it's raining and I don't have anywhere to go." He looked at his sleeping daughter, then at the storm outside. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're listening from today. Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you're new here, consider subscribing so you don't miss what happens next. 3 hours earlier, Stephen had come home from a 10-hour shift fixing burst pipes in a downtown office building. His hands still smelled like copper and rust. The apartment was dark except for the television's blue glow, where his daughter Serena had fallen asleep on the couch, her small body curled around a teddy bear so old its fur had worn thin in patches. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her breathe. She was 6 years old, and she was everything he had. Stephen lifted her gently, careful not to wake her, and carried her to the bedroom. The apartment was small enough that 5 steps took him from the living room to her bed. He tucked the blanket around her shoulders and placed the teddy bear under her arm. She stirred slightly, murmuring something he couldn't understand, then settled back into sleep. He closed her door halfway and returned to the living room. Dirty dishes sat in the sink. A stack of bills covered one corner of the kitchen table, some of them marked with red letters he tried not to look at. Laundry spilled from a basket by the couch, waiting to be folded. Stephen sat down heavily and pulled out his wallet. $47 until Friday. He did the math in his head, the same calculation he'd done 1,000 times. Rent was due in 2 weeks. Serena needed new shoes because her toes were pushing against the front of her old ones. The electric bill was already a month behind. He leaned back and let his eyes close. On the wall across from him hung a drawing Serena had made in crayon, 2 stick figures holding hands inside a small house. Just 2 figures, no one else. That was when the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. His first instinct was to ignore it. Nothing good ever came from unknown calls in the middle of the night. But something made him answer anyway. The voice on the other end sent him 15 years into the past. Denise. He hadn't heard that voice since high school, since a night after prom when they'd sat on the back steps of the gym and talked until the sun came up. She'd been wearing a silver bracelet he'd bought her with 3 weeks of lawn mowing money. They'd almost kissed that night. Almost became something more. But life had other plans. She moved away that summer. He stayed. They lost touch the way young people do, slowly, and then all at once. Now her voice came through the phone, stripped of everything he remembered. No laughter, no warmth, just fear. "Can you come get me?" He locked the door. Stephen was already reaching for his keys. "Where are you?" She gave him an address on the other side of the city. He wrote it on the back of an envelope, his handwriting barely legible. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Stay somewhere dry if you can." He hung up and stood in the middle of his apartment, caught between 2 impossible choices. He couldn't leave Serena alone, but he couldn't leave Denise out there either. Mrs. Patterson. The thought came to him like a lifeline. His neighbor across the hall, a retired woman who'd watched Serena a dozen times before when his shifts ran late. He knocked on her door, apologizing for the hour, explaining only that there was an emergency. She asked no questions, just pulled on her robe and shuffled across to his apartment. Stephen drove through streets that were empty except for the rain. His wipers could barely keep up with the downpour. At red lights, he caught himself gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles ached. He found her at a bus stop near her address, huddled under the small shelter that did almost nothing to block the sideways rain. She was soaked through, wearing only a thin sweater and jeans. When his headlights swept across her, he saw the bruise on her cheekbone, dark and swollen. She got into his car without a word. Water dripped from her hair onto the seats. Her hands were shaking, and not just from the cold. Stephen pulled off his jacket and handed it to her. She wrapped it around her shoulders like armor. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the rain on the roof and the rhythm of the wipers. Then Denise reached out and touched something hanging from his rearview mirror, a thin silver bracelet tarnished with age. "You still have it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It reminds me of simpler times." She let go of the bracelet and turned to look out the window. "I'm sorry, Stephen. I didn't know who else to call. My family's gone. My friends, he made sure I lost them all. Your number was the only one I still remembered by heart." He didn't ask who he was. The bruise on her face told him enough. They pulled up to his apartment building. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle. Stephen cut the engine but didn't move to get out. "It's small," he said, staring at the building's front door. "Really small. And I've got a kid, so it's not quiet. But there's still room, if you need it." Denise shook her head slowly. "I can't do that to you. You have your own life, your own problems. Denise, it's almost 3 in the morning. You're bleeding. We'll figure the rest out tomorrow." She looked at him then, really looked, and something in her expression cracked open. She nodded once and followed him inside. The apartment was dark when they entered. Mrs. Patterson had dozed off in the armchair, and she woke with a start when the door opened. Stephen thanked her quietly, promised to explain later, and walked her back across the hall. When he returned, Denise was standing in the middle of his living room, dripping onto the worn carpet. She looked lost, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to exist in this space. A small voice came from the hallway. "Daddy?" Serena stood in her bedroom doorway, clutching Mr. Buttons against her chest. Her eyes were wide and fixed on the strange woman in their home. Stephen walked over and crouched down to her level. "Hey, baby. Why are you awake?" "I heard voices." Serena's gaze didn't leave Denise. "Who is she?" "She's a friend. She needs help." He smoothed a hand over Serena's braids, the ones he'd spent an hour doing yesterday because the YouTube tutorial made it look easier than it was. "Remember what we talked about? When someone needs help and we can help, what do we do?" Serena thought about it, her small face serious. "We help. That's my girl." Serena studied Denise for another long moment. Then she walked over, her bare feet padding softly on the carpet, and held out her teddy bear. "You can borrow Mr. Buttons. He helps me when I'm sad." Denise dropped to her knees so she was at eye level with the child. Her hands trembled as she accepted the worn bear. Tears spilled down her cheeks, mixing with the rain that still clung to her skin. "Thank you, sweetheart," she managed. "Thank you so much." Serena nodded with the gravity of someone who understood that some things were too important for words. Then she looked up at her father. "She can stay, Daddy. There's room." Stephen felt something shift in his chest, a door opening that he'd kept locked for a long time. He looked at his daughter, then at Denise, then at the tiny apartment that could barely contain 2 people, let alone 3. But Serena was right. There was room. The first 3 days were an exercise in careful navigation. Stephen gave up his bed and moved to the couch, insisting that Denise take the bedroom with Serena. The apartment had never felt so small. Every morning, 3 people rotated through 1 bathroom. Every evening, 3 plates crowded onto a table built for 2. Denise flinched at sudden noises. The first time Stephen dropped his keys on the counter, she jerked backward so violently she knocked over a glass of water. She apologized over and over while cleaning it up, her hands shaking against the paper towels. Stephen pretended not to notice. He knew that acknowledging it would only make it worse. Serena watched everything with eyes that missed nothing. She didn't ask questions about why Denise jumped at loud sounds, or why she sometimes stared at the locked front door like she expected it to burst open. But Stephen saw the way his daughter observed, processing information she was too young to fully understand. On the third evening, Stephen came home from work to find Serena at the kitchen table with her crayons. She was drawing with intense concentration, her tongue poking out slightly from the corner of her mouth, the way it always did when she was focused. He looked over her shoulder at the picture. 3 stick figures inside a house shape, but the third figure, the one with long hair like Denise, stood outside a window, looking in. "That's a nice picture, baby," Stephen said carefully. "Can you tell me about it?" Serena shrugged without looking up. "It's our house." "I see that. But why is she outside?" His daughter finally met his eyes. "I don't know if she's staying." The words hit Stephen somewhere deep. He understood then that Serena was protecting herself, building walls around her heart before they could be broken again. Her mother had left when she was 2 years old. One morning she was there, and the next she was gone, leaving behind only a worn teddy bear and a silence that Stephen had never fully explained. Now his daughter was bracing for another departure. That night, after Serena was asleep, Stephen sat alone in the kitchen staring at the bills that never seemed to shrink. Rent was still due in 11 days. His $47 had become $32 after gas to get to work. Adding another person to the household meant more food, more electricity, more water. Numbers that didn't add up no matter how many times he calculated them. Denise appeared in the doorway. She'd showered and changed into clothes they'd bought at a thrift store, since she'd left her home with nothing but what she was wearing. Her bruise had faded to yellow at the edges, but it was still visible in the dim light. "You should be sleeping," he said. "Can't." She sat down across from him. "I saw Serena's drawing." Stephen didn't respond. "I'm making things harder for you," Denise continued. "I can see it in those bills. I can see it in how tired you look." "I was tired before you got here." "Stephen, don't. Don't pretend this isn't a burden." He set down the bill he'd been holding. "What do you want me to say? That this is easy?" "It's not. But that doesn't mean I regret it." Denise looked down at her hands. "I need to do something. I can't just sit here and think all day. Let me help around the house at least. Cooking, cleaning, whatever. I need to be useful." Stephen thought about arguing, about telling her she didn't owe him anything, but he recognized the desperation in her voice. It wasn't about repaying a debt. It was about feeling like she still existed, like she still had purpose. "Okay," he said, "but only if you want to." The next morning, Stephen woke to the smell of eggs and toast. Denise was in the kitchen, moving with a quiet efficiency that suggested she'd been up for hours. Serena sat at the table, watching her with the same careful observation she'd been practicing all week. "Miss Denise makes eggs different than you, Daddy," Serena announced when Stephen emerged from the couch. "Better or worse?" His daughter considered the question with great seriousness. "Different." Stephen caught Denise's eye across the kitchen. For the first time since that rainy night, she almost smiled. The days began to develop a rhythm. Stephen went to work. Denise cleaned the apartment until it gleamed, then started on small repairs he'd been putting off for months. A squeaky cabinet hinge, a bathroom faucet that dripped. Tasks she said she'd learned from watching YouTube videos during long hours alone in her old house. Serena remained cautious, but her walls were developing cracks. On the 5th day, Denise found her drawing at the kitchen table and asked if she could sit down. "You're really good at this," Denise said, studying the crayon landscape Serena was creating. "Can you teach me?" Serena's eyebrows rose. It was clear that adults didn't usually ask children to teach them things. She handed Denise a blue crayon with the gravity of a surgeon passing a scalpel. "You have to stay inside the lines," Serena instructed, "but not too much. A little bit outside is okay because it makes it look more real." They drew together in silence for a while. Then Serena spoke without looking up from her paper. "Miss Denise, do you have a mommy?" Denise's hand stilled over her drawing. "I did. She passed away a few years ago. My mommy went away too." Serena pressed harder with her yellow crayon, filling in a sun. "But she didn't die. She just left. The air in the room felt heavier. Denise searched for the right words and found none. Serena kept coloring. Are you going to leave too? Denise set down her crayon and turned to face the little girl. I don't want to, but sometimes grown-ups have to do things they don't want to. That's what Daddy says about work. Your daddy is a smart man. Serena finally looked up. If you stay, you can keep borrowing Mr. Buttons. But only if you stay. That evening, after Serena had gone to bed, Stephen and Denise sat on the couch while rain tapped against the windows. A gentler rain than the storm that had brought her here, but rain nonetheless. She asked if I was going to leave, Denise said quietly. Stephen nodded. She asks me that about everybody, the mailman, her teacher, Mrs. Patterson across the hall. What do you tell her? The truth. That some people stay and some people go, and we can't always control which is which. Denise turned to look at the silver bracelet still hanging from his keys on the hook by the door. I should have chosen you, Stephen. Back then, after prom, I was stupid to let us drift apart. We were kids. We didn't know anything. You knew enough to be kind. Her voice cracked slightly. I forgot what that felt like. Until now. They sat in the darkness, not touching, but closer than they'd been in 15 years. Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of a road not taken that might finally have a second chance. On the 8th day, Stephen came home from work to find an unfamiliar car parked in front of his building. He noticed it immediately because he noticed everything about his surroundings now. A week of being on edge had sharpened his senses. He scanned the street, the sidewalk, the windows of his building. Nothing seemed out of place, but as he climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, he heard shouting, a man's voice, loud and angry, echoing through the hallway. Denise, I know you're in there. Open the damn door. Stephen took the remaining stairs 2 at a time. When he rounded the corner, he saw a white man in an expensive jacket pounding on his apartment door. Broad shoulders, hands that looked like they knew how to hurt. Vincent. It had to be. Hey, Stephen kept his voice steady as he approached. You need to leave. Vincent spun around. His face was red with rage, but there was something calculated in his eyes that told Stephen this man was dangerous in more ways than one. Who the hell are you? Vincent demanded. This is between me and my wife. Not anymore. She's not going anywhere with you. Vincent stepped closer, close enough that Stephen could smell alcohol on his breath. You think you can take what's mine? She's not yours. Stephen didn't back away. She's not anybody's property. Now leave before I call the cops. Vincent shoved him hard in the chest. Stephen stumbled backward, but kept his footing. Every instinct screamed at him to fight back, to make this man understand with his fists what words couldn't convey. But he thought of Serena. He thought of the custody arrangement he'd fought for years to maintain. One assault charge, even in self-defense, could destroy everything. You can hit me if you want, Stephen said, his voice low and controlled. But there's a camera right there. He pointed to the security camera mounted above the stairwell. And my daughter is inside watching. You want to explain to a judge why you assaulted someone in front of a 6-year-old? Vincent's eyes flicked to the camera, then to the apartment door. Through the small window beside it, Serena's face was visible, her eyes wide with terror. Something shifted in Vincent's expression. The rage didn't disappear, but it retreated behind a mask of cold calculation. This isn't over, he said quietly. The words meant only for Stephen. She belongs with me, and she knows it. He turned and walked down the stairs, his footsteps echoing long after he disappeared. Stephen waited until he heard the car engine start and pull away. Then he unlocked the door with hands that were steadier than they should have been. Inside, Denise was pressed against the wall, trembling so violently she could barely stand. Serena hadn't moved from the window, her face pale and frozen. Stephen went to his daughter first. He knelt down and wrapped his arms around her. feeling her small body shaking against his chest.
"Daddy, that man was scary,"
she whispered.
"I know, baby. But he's gone now. I won't let anyone hurt you. Ever."
He held her until the shaking stopped, then carried her to the bedroom and tucked her in with Mr. Buttons. She clung to the bear like a lifeline, her eyes still too wide in her small face. When he returned to the living room, Denise had slid down the wall to the floor. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks.
"I'm so sorry," she said. "I brought this to your door, to your daughter. This is exactly what I was afraid of."
Stephen sat down beside her on the floor.
"How did he find you?"
"Phone. He must have tracked it before I thought to turn off the location. I should have known. He always finds me." She buried her face in her hands.
"I should leave. Tonight. Before he comes back."
"And go where?" "I don't know. A shelter. The street. Anywhere that's not here. Putting you and Serena in danger." Stephen was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached over and gently pulled her hands away from her face. "You're not going anywhere tonight. We're going to lock the door. And tomorrow I'm going to figure out what our options are. But you don't run scared in the middle of the night." That's what he wants. Denise stared at him like he was speaking a language she'd forgotten how to understand. "Why are you doing this? You barely know me anymore." "I know enough." He stood and offered her his hand. "Come on. You need sleep." That night, Stephen checked the locks 3 times. He wedged a chair under the front door handle. He lay awake on the couch, listening to every sound in the building, waiting for footsteps that never came. The days that followed were heavy with unspoken tension. Stephen called in favors he didn't have, reaching out to everyone he knew for any kind of help. A coworker mentioned a lawyer who did pro bono work through a domestic violence shelter. Stephen got the number and made an appointment. But at home, things were fracturing. The stress was getting to him in ways he couldn't hide. His shifts felt longer, his patients felt shorter. The bills kept piling up, and now there was the added cost of worrying about security, about safety, about everything he'd been trying so hard to hold together. On the 10th night, Serena spilled her milk across the kitchen table. It soaked through her homework, turning careful pencil marks into gray smudges. "Serena!" Stephen's voice came out sharper than he intended, loud enough to make both Serena and Denise flinch. "Can't you be more careful?" The moment the words left his mouth, he wanted to take them back. Serena's face crumpled. She didn't cry, which was somehow worse. She just went very still, then slid off her chair and walked to her bedroom without a word. The door closed with a soft click that felt louder than any slam. Stephen stood there, staring at the spreading puddle of milk, hating himself. Denise silently got a towel and began cleaning it up. She didn't look at him, didn't say anything, and her silence was its own kind of judgment. Later, after the milk was cleaned and the apartment was quiet, Stephen crept into Serena's room. She was curled on her side. Mr. Buttons clutched against her chest, her eyes closed but her breathing too uneven for sleep. He sat on the edge of her bed and put his hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry, baby," he whispered. "Daddy's just tired. But that's not an excuse. I shouldn't have yelled at you." Serena didn't respond. Maybe she was asleep after all, or maybe she just didn't have words for what she was feeling. Stephen stayed there for a long time, his hand on his daughter's shoulder, wondering when he'd become the kind of father he'd promised himself he'd never be. The next morning, Denise was quieter than usual. She moved through the apartment like a ghost, avoiding eye contact with Stephen. He knew what she was thinking because he was thinking it, too. This wasn't working. Something had to give. But he didn't know what, and neither did she, so they said nothing and let the silence grow. On the 12th day, Stephen came home to find Denise on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. She hung up quickly when she saw him. "Who was that?" "A shelter downtown. They have a bed available starting next week." Stephen felt something cold settle in his chest.
You're leaving? I'm thinking about it. Denise couldn't meet his eyes. Stephen, look at what's happening. You yelled at Serena. You haven't slept properly in days. You're falling apart, and it's because of me. It's not because of you. Then why? She finally looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. Why is everything falling apart? He didn't have an answer. Maybe because everything had been falling apart long before she arrived, and her presence had just made it impossible to ignore anymore. That afternoon, Serena drew another picture. Stephen found it on the kitchen table after his daughter had gone to bed. 2 stick figures inside a house, a third figure outside the door, back turned, walking away. He stared at it for a long time. At 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, Stephen walked to the bedroom door and pushed it open a crack. Denise was awake, sitting up against the headboard, staring at nothing. Serena slept beside her, Mr. Buttons tucked under her chin. Denise saw him and put a finger to her lips. She carefully extracted herself from the bed and joined him in the hallway. I saw Serena's picture, she said quietly. So did I. She's waiting for me to leave. She's already grieving it. Stephen leaned against the wall. What do you want to do? I don't know what I want anymore. I only know what I don't want. Denise's voice was barely audible. I don't want to hurt that little girl. I don't want to hurt you. But staying seems to hurt everyone, and leaving seems to hurt everyone, and I don't know how to exist in a world where every choice causes pain. She was crying now, silent tears that she wiped away impatiently. The shelter called back today, she continued. They can take me tomorrow if I want. They have resources, legal aid, job placement, everything I need to start over. Is that what you want? To start over somewhere else? Denise closed her eyes. I want to not be a burden. For once in my life, I want to stand on my own 2 feet without dragging someone else down with me. Stephen understood. He hated it. But he understood. She wasn't running away from him. She was running towards something she'd never had, an identity that wasn't defined by the men around her. If that's what you need, he said slowly, then you should go. She opened her eyes. Something in them broke. You're not going to fight for me to stay? Is that what you want me to do? The question hung between them, unanswered and unanswerable. In the morning, Stephen left for work before anyone else was awake. He couldn't face it. Couldn't face her. Couldn't face the goodbye that was coming whether he wanted it or not. When he came home that evening, the apartment was quiet in a way that made his heart stop. Denise's few belongings were gone. Her shoes weren't by the door. The bathroom no longer held her toothbrush. On the kitchen table, he found a letter. Stephen, thank you for everything. But I can't keep doing this to you and Serena. You opened your door when no one else would. That means everything. But I have to find my own way now. Please tell Serena I'm sorry, and that Mr. Buttons helped. D. Beside the letter, on Serena's bed, lay the worn teddy bear. Denise had given it back. Stephen stood in the empty apartment, the letter crumpling in his fist. Then he heard a small voice from the hallway. She left. Serena stood in the doorway to her room, her face pale. Like Mommy. Stephen dropped the letter and went to his daughter. He knelt down in front of her, searching for words that wouldn't come. Daddy, Serena whispered. Why does everyone leave us? The question broke something open inside him. All the walls he'd built, all the careful distances he'd maintained, all the protection he'd wrapped around his heart to keep from being hurt again. None of it mattered when his daughter looked at him with those eyes. He didn't have an answer. He'd never had an answer. But for the first time, he realized that maybe the answer wasn't about why people left. Maybe it was about fighting for them to stay. Stephen stood in the middle of his apartment, his daughter's question echoing in his ears. Why does everyone leave us? He looked at Serena, at her small face that had learned too young to expect disappointment.
He looked at the letter crumpled in his hand, at the teddy bear lying abandoned on the bed, and he made a decision. "Baby, I need you to stay with Mrs. Patterson for a little while." He was already moving toward the door, grabbing his keys from the hook. The silver bracelet swung and caught the light. Serena's eyes went wide. "Where are you going?" "To bring her back." He knelt down in front of his daughter. "Or at least to ask her to stay. The rest is up to her." "What if she says no?" Stephen touched Serena's cheek gently. "Then at least we tried. At least she'll know we wanted her here." He knocked on Mrs. Patterson's door, explained he had an emergency, and was in his car within 3 minutes. The shelter. He could call them, find out if Denise had arrived, but something told him she hadn't gone there. Not yet. He thought about what she'd told him during those late-night conversations. Fragments of her past that she'd shared like pieces of broken glass, careful not to cut either of them. Her mother, who died 3 years ago. The park by the river where they used to go when Denise was young. "Water helps wash away the bad thoughts," her mother used to say. Stephen drove toward the river. The park was nearly empty in the fading afternoon light. A few joggers on the path. A man walking his dog. And there, on a bench facing the water, a woman with a duffel bag at her feet. Stephen parked and walked toward her. His footsteps crunched on the gravel path, loud enough that she heard him coming. She didn't turn around. He sat down on the bench beside her. The river moved slowly past them, brown and quiet. "You should be with Serena," Denise said without looking at him. "Mrs. Patterson's with her. She'll be fine for an hour." Denise kept her eyes on the water. "How did you know I'd be here?" "You told me about this place. About your mother." She nodded slowly, as if she'd forgotten she'd shared that piece of herself. "I used to come here when I was a kid, whenever things got bad at home. Before it got worse, before Vincent." She finally turned to look at him. Her eyes were red but dry. "I can't keep being your problem, Stephen. You're not my problem." He held her gaze. "You're my choice." The words hung in the air between them. Denise shook her head. "You don't know what you're choosing. Vincent won't stop. He'll keep coming. He'll make your life hell. He'll use Serena against you if he can." "I talked to that lawyer, the one from the shelter." Stephen reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, worn at the edges from being handled too many times. "She says we can file for a restraining order. It won't be quick, and it won't be easy. But it's a start." Denise stared at the card like it was written in a language she couldn't read. "You did that?" "I did that for us. All 3 of us." "There is no us, Stephen. There's you and Serena, and I'm just someone who crashed into your life because I had nowhere else to go." Stephen turned on the bench so he was facing her fully. "You want to know why I still have that bracelet? The one from prom?" Denise didn't answer. "Because it reminds me of the last time I let something good slip away without fighting for it. I was 17 years old and I thought I had all the time in the world. I thought if something was meant to be, it would just happen." He shook his head. "I'm not 17 anymore, and I'm done waiting for things to just happen." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that my apartment is too small. My bank account is too empty. And I've got a little girl who's already had her heart broken once." He reached over and took Denise's hand. She flinched but didn't pull away. "But she drew a picture this morning. You want to know what it was?" Denise shook her head. 2 people in a house, and a 3rd person walking away. Stephen squeezed her hand gently. "She's already grieving you, Denise. She's already convinced herself you're gone, and when I asked her why everyone leaves, I didn't have an answer." "I've never had an answer." He took a breath. "But I'm tired of not having answers. I'm tired of letting people walk away because fighting for them is hard." Denise's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she didn't wipe them away. "If you stay," Stephen continued, "we'll figure it out together, not because I feel sorry for you,
Not because I owe you anything, but because I want you there. Serena wants you there. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any of us can offer each other. What if it's not enough? Her voice was barely a whisper. What if I'm too broken? What if I can't be what you need me to be? I'm not asking you to be anything except yourself. The rest, we figure out as we go. Denise looked back at the river. The sun was setting now, painting the water gold and orange. Okay, she said finally. Stephen blinked. Okay? Okay. I'll stay. She turned to face him, and something in her expression had shifted. Not fixed, not healed, but different, lighter. But I'm paying rent as soon as I get a job, and I'm filing for divorce, and I'm not going to be some damsel you rescued. I'm going to stand on my own feet, even if I have to learn how. Stephen felt a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Deal. They sat there for a while longer, watching the sun sink below the horizon. Then Stephen stood and offered her his hand. Come on. There's a little girl at home who needs to know you're not leaving. Denise took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. She picked up her duffel bag and followed him to the car. The drive back was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. Not heavy with unspoken words, but light with things that didn't need to be said. When they walked through the apartment door, Serena was sitting on the couch with Mrs. Patterson, pretending to watch television. But her eyes went straight to Denise, wide and uncertain. Denise set down her bag and walked over to the couch. She knelt down so she was at eye level with Serena. I'm sorry I left, she said. That wasn't fair to you. Serena clutched Mr. Buttons tighter. Are you going to leave again? I don't want to, but I can't promise that bad things won't happen. I can only promise that I'll try my best to stay. Denise reached out and gently touched Serena's cheek. Is that okay? Serena considered this with the seriousness of a judge weighing evidence. Then she held out the teddy bear. You forgot Mr. Buttons. Denise took the bear and held it against her chest. Thank you for keeping him safe for me. That night, after Mrs. Patterson had gone home and Serena was asleep, Stephen and Denise sat on the couch in the darkness. The apartment was still too small. The bills were still piled on the table. Nothing had really changed. And yet everything had. Thank you for coming to find me, Denise said quietly. Thank you for answering the phone that night. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. Outside, the city hummed with its endless noise, but inside the apartment, there was peace. 3 weeks later, Serena presented Stephen with a new drawing. 3 stick figures inside a house, all of them smiling. And above the door, in careful crayon letters, one word, home. Stephen looked at his daughter, then at Denise, who was washing dishes and humming a song he didn't recognize. Ordinary, simple, and perfect because of it. This is beautiful, baby, he said. Serena nodded with complete confidence. I know. That night, long after everyone should have been asleep, Stephen stood at the window looking out at the city lights. Denise came up beside him. There's still room, you know, he said softly. Not just in the apartment. Denise took his hand and interlaced her fingers with his. I know, she said. Outside, the city sprawled endless and indifferent. But in one small apartment on the 3rd floor, a light stayed on, a single point of warmth in the darkness. A family that had chosen each other. A home that had room enough for 3. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. There are more stories like this one waiting for you. Until next time, take care of each other.